The rust tasted like failure. Elias Thorne knew the flavor intimately, a bitter metallic tang on the back of the tongue that clung for hours after a shift. It was the taste of the Tolan man. The colossal, cancerous station he called home, a graveyard of derelict starships welded together over centuries, orbiting the dim, angry eye of a brown dwarf. Here, in the deep void between charted systems, history came to die, and men like Elias came to pick its bones. He braced a hand against a weeping bulkhead, the ship womb around him groaning as its ancient metals contracted in the cold. A fine, shimmering dust coated his glove. Not rust. This time, this was the blight. He wiped the glove on his thigh. A useless gesture. The gray blight was everywhere, a slow, patient plague of self-replicating nanites that consumed inorganic matter. It was a creeping tide of molecular disassembly, turning meters of proud naval steel into inert, gray powder overnight. Fighting it was like trying to shovel the sea. A shower of sparks rained down from a conduit overhead as Anya, his second, sliced through a fused support beam with a plasma cutter. Her face, illuminated by the tool's actinic glare, was a road map of scars and Scrapper's intuition. Fields fluctuating again. Eli, she grunted, her voice a gravelly rasp filtered through the comms. The harmonics are off. It's letting the dust seep through the emitters. Elias didn't need to look at his wrist-mounted diagnostic tool. He could feel it in his teeth, a low thrumming that was just slightly out of key. The massive magnetic containment fields that wrapped the Tolan man were their only real defense, a fragile shield that repelled the blight cloud the station perpetually drifted through. But the station was a patchwork monstrosity. 1,000 different systems from 1,000 different eras jury-rigged into a barely cohesive whole. Maintaining the shield was a constant, desperate act of triage. "I see it," he murmured, keying commands into his datapad. "Diverting power from the aft smelting core. It'll buy us a few hours, but the guild will scream when their quotas dip." Anya killed the plasma cutter, plunging the corridor into the gloomy glow of emergency lighting. Let 'em scream. Better than waking up to find the mess hall has been eaten. She kicked a loose plate of decking, the sound echoing into the labyrinthine darkness. How much longer can we keep this up? Every patch is a little weaker than the last. One of these days, a wave is going to hit us that we can't push back. It was the question no one asked, but everyone thought. The Tolan man was home to nearly 3,000 souls exiles, debtors, and runaways who preferred the brutal honesty of scrapping to the polished lies of the core worlds. They were his people. He was the station's chief engineer, a title he'd inherited more through competence than ambition. He was the one who knew which systems could be pushed, which could be bled, and which were one bad reboot away from total collapse. It was a responsibility that felt like a physical weight, pressing down on him in the recycled air. He thought of the Icarus, the prototype Explorer-class vessel he had helped design years ago. Its sleek lines and revolutionary drive, core meant to be his masterpiece. Instead, it had become his shame. Its name synonymous with catastrophic failure after its core breached during its maiden voyage. The official inquiry had laid the blame on a structural flaw in his containment schematics. He'd been exiled, his career and reputation turned to the same gray dust that now threatened to consume him. He never spoke of it, but the memory was a ghost that walked the gantries with him, a constant reminder of his fall from grace. "We'll hold," Elias said, the words tasting like ash. "We always do." His assurance felt hollow. Even to him, they were losing. The blight was growing more aggressive, the safe windows for salvage runs shrinking. Supplies were tight, and the low, persistent hum of fear was beginning to drown out the noise of the machinery. Their desperate existence was thrown into sharp relief a week later. The proximity alarm, a sound so rarely used its klaxon was choked with dust, blared through the station. It wasn't the shriek of a containment breach. It was the clear, piercing tone of an approaching vessel, an unregistered vessel. Elias and Anya were on the command deck, a cramped, chaotic space retrofitted from the bridge of a century-old dreadnought in minutes. The main view screen, prone to flickering, showed a single, pristine shape resolving out of the black. It was a dagger of white and silver, impossibly clean against the void. Its design speaking of wealth and advanced technology that felt alien next to their rusted hulk. "Identify," Elias commanded, his voice tight. "No transponder code," the comms officer reported, her eyes wide. "But she's broadcasting a wideband hail. It's Xenocorp." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Xenocorp was the titan of the outer sectors, a conglomerate that devoured resources and worlds with equal rapacity. They were pioneers of science, but their ethics were a matter of myth and cautionary tales. "What the hell do they want out here?" Anya muttered, crossing her thick arms. "This is a graveyard, not a showroom." "Put them through," Elias ordered, his gut twisting into a cold knot. The screen flickered, replaced by the crisp, corporate logo of Xenocorp, which then dissolved to reveal a man in a clinical white uniform. His features were sharp, his smile practiced. "Station designated Tolan Man." The man began, his voice smooth as polished durasteel. "This is the research vessel Stellar Lane Prospect. We are on a mission to track and study a hazardous nanite contagion. Our readings indicate you are in the direct path of a high-density swarm. We are prepared to offer technical assistance and resources to ensure your survival." A wave of murmurs swept through the command deck. Hope, sharp and dangerous, pierced the gloom. Assistance resources. It was a lifeline they had long ago stopped praying for. Elias stared at the screen, suspicion a cold counterweight to the sudden surge of optimism. Nothing from Xenocorp was free. "We're managing our situation," Elias replied evenly, choosing his words with care. "What's your price?" The man's smile didn't falter. "Consider it a humanitarian gesture. The data we can gather from your containment field's interaction with the swarm is payment enough. We only require permission to dock and dispatch a technical team to liaise with your engineering chief." Anya leaned close to Elias, her voice a low whisper. "It's a trick. It has to be." "Maybe," Elias whispered back. "But what choice do we have? Our primary shield emitter is going to fail within the cycle. We can't fix it. They know it, or they wouldn't be here." He felt the eyes of the entire bridge crew on him, saw the desperate hope in their faces. He was trapped. To refuse could doom them all. To accept could be a different kind of death sentence. He hated it. He hated the powerlessness, the feeling of another's chessboard. He keyed the comm. "Permission granted. Prospect. Send your team. I'll meet them at Docking Bay. 7. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Elias ordered the bay secured, posting his most trusted scrappers as guards. He felt like a man inviting a wolf into his home, hoping to convince it to eat the rats in his cellar. The Prospect shuttle was as sleek and silent as its mothership, settling into the cavernous, rust-streaked docking bay with an unnerving grace. The airlock hissed open, revealing a ramp bathed in clean, white light. A team of 4 figures in immaculate Xenocorp envirosuits descended, their movements precise and economical. They moved with an assurance that grated on Elias, the confidence of those who own the stars, not just scavenged in their shadows. The lead figure stopped a few meters from Elias and his crew. The others fanned out, their helmeted faces unreadable. For a long moment, nobody spoke, the cavernous silence broken only by the distant groans of the station's metal skeleton. Then, the leader reached up and unsealed his helmet. The hiss of depressurization was unnaturally loud. He pulled it off, and the sterile, recycled air of the bay washed over features that Elias knew better than his own. The face was older, etched with lines of ambition and arrogance that hadn't been there a decade ago. But the cold, calculating intelligence in the eyes was the same. The same eyes that had watched him take the fall for the Icarus disaster without a flicker of remorse. It was his brother. Eris, Elias breathed, the name a shard of glass in his throat. Dr. Eris Thorn, Xenocorp's celebrated wunderkind, a man who had built a legendary career on the ashes of Elias's own, stood before him. A cold, predatory smile spread across Eris's face, a smile that held no warmth, only the chilling satisfaction of a long-laid plan coming to fruition. "Hello, little brother," Eris said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, decaying bay. "Looks like you've gotten yourself into another mess. Good thing I'm here to clean it up." The promise of salvation felt like the cocking of a gun. The friendly greeting a declaration of a war Elias had never known was coming. The rust in his mouth suddenly tasted of more than just failure. It tasted of betrayal. The silence in Docking Bay 7 was a heavy, suffocating thing, thick with the ghosts of a shared past. For a moment, Elias felt the deck plates shift beneath his feet, the world tilting on the axis of his brother's name. Aris, the architect of his exile, the ghost at his feast of failures, was here, clad in the pristine white of the enemy. Anya shifted beside him, her hand instinctively moving toward the heavy wrench holstered at her hip. Her loyalty was a tangible thing, a low growl in the back of the silence. Elias gave a minute shake of his head, a gesture only she would catch. Violence was a language Aris understood, but it was one he was infinitely better at manipulating. "Cleaning up," Elias repeated, his voice dangerously low and steady, a feat of control that cost him dearly. "That's a new role for you. I seem to recall your specialty was in creating the mess in the first place." Eris's smile didn't waver. It was a mask of placid superiority. "Perspective, little brother. The Icarus was a necessary failure, a stepping stone. Its data paved the way for technologies you can't even imagine. Technologies that are going to save this rust bucket you call home." He gestured expansively at the decaying bay around them. "And all I ask in return is a little cooperation." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Eris wasn't just rewriting history, he was trying to sell it back to him. The Icarus hadn't been a stepping stone. It had been a tomb for 27 crew members, vaporized in a flash of exotic particles because Aris had pushed the drive core past every safety protocol, chasing a breakthrough. And when the inquiry came, Aris, with his silver tongue and doctored logs, had pointed the finger squarely at Elias's containment field designs. "Your help comes with strings," Elias stated, not a question. "Everything does," Aris conceded with a theatrical sigh. But my strings are quite simple. I need to integrate our proprietary harmonic balancers into your shield emitter network. My team will handle the installation. You will provide access and oversight. We stabilize your field. We gather our data on the Blight's swarm behavior, and we depart. Everyone wins. Behind Eris, his team stood like statues, their featureless helmets reflecting the dim, flickering lights of the bay. They weren't engineers. They were wolves in lab coats. Anya, escort two of them to the primary shield control, Elias said, his eyes locked on Eris. You and I will take the others to central engineering. You'll have full access to our diagnostics, but my people shadow your every move. You touch one unauthorized panel. You so much as breathe on a system without my clearance, and this humanitarian gesture is over. Aris gave a slight, condescending bow, as the station chief commands. Or the journey to central engineering was a tense, silent procession through the guts of the Talon man. The Xenocorp team moved with an unnerving efficiency, their immaculate suits a stark contrast to the grime-caked walls and weeping conduits. They were an invasive species, too clean, too perfect for this ecosystem of decay. Elias led them into the heart of the station, a cavernous space dominated by the fusion reactor's colossal housing. Here, the air hummed with power, thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. Makeshift cabling, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the floor, a testament to decades of desperate improvisation. Iris took it all in, a flicker of something pity, perhaps, or contempt in his eyes. My God, Eli, this is a museum piece. I'm surprised it generates enough power to keep the lights on, let alone repel a Class 4 nanite swarm. She has good bones, Elias retorted, his hand resting on a coolant pipe that was warm to the touch. Familiar. We make do. Iris's team didn't wait for pleasantries. They opened their cases, revealing devices that seemed to absorb the light around them. They were sleek, black modules, covered in a matrix of faint, pulsing blue glyphs. They attached them to the main power conduits with magnetic clamps, their movements swift and synchronized. It was like watching a team of surgeons operate on a patient with tools from the future. As they worked, Eris strolled through the engineering deck, his gaze analytical. The Blight, he said, his voice casual. It's a fascinating organism, isn't it? Not truly alive, but it mimics life's primary directive: consume and replicate. But we've noticed anomalies. Certain swarms exhibit patterns, almost like a primitive hive intelligence. It's a plague, Elias said flatly. It eats ships. That's all I need to know. Is it? Eris stopped beside a diagnostic screen displaying the shield's failing energy cycle. Or is it a tool? Imagine. Elias, if you could control it, a self-replicating, molecular deconstruction agent you could aim, point it at an enemy fleet, a hostile world, the perfect weapon, no radiation, no collateral damage to organic life, just quiet erasure. A cold dread trickled down Elias's spine. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a weapons test. The Talon man and its 3,000 souls were the guinea pigs. That's insane. Elias breathed. You're talking about genocide. I am talking about security, Oris countered smoothly. The kind that ensures humanity's dominance for the next 1,000 years. Sometimes, progress requires a firm hand. His team leader looked up. Sir, the primary modules are integrated. We're ready to sync with the network, but the power fluctuations are too severe. To stabilize the grid for the final integration, we need to tap into the main trunk line. The schematics show it runs through the Seraphim Wing. The name struck Elias like a physical blow. The Seraphim Wing was the oldest part of the station, the core around which all the other wrecks had been grafted. It was built from the remains of the Archangel Seraphim, a colony ship from the dark age of technology, lost for centuries before scrappers had found its hulk. It was a place of legend and fear, a sealed-off labyrinth of corridors that were structurally unsound and rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of its long-dead crew. No one went there. "That section is off-limits," Elias said immediately. "It's a dead zone, structurally compromised. According to your own schematics, it also contains the most direct and heavily shielded power conduit on the station," Eris replied, his tone brooking no argument. He tapped his data pad, projecting a shimmering blue schematic into the air between them. "Right here. Tapping into this would allow us to create a stable power loop, bypassing your failing regulators entirely. It's the only way to guarantee the harmonic balancers will work when the swarm hits. And it is going to hit." "Elias, my long-range sensors show the swarm density is increasing exponentially. You have less than 12 hours. It was a perfect trap. A logical, sound engineering reason that masked an ulterior motive. He knew it. He could feel the wrongness of it in his bones. But Eris was right about the timeline. The station's own sensors confirmed it. The approaching wave of blight was bigger than anything they had ever faced. Refusing meant death. He looked at the faces of his own crew, men and women who trusted him, who looked to him for answers he didn't have. Their faces were smudged with grease and weariness, but also with a defiant hope ignited by Xenocorp's arrival. How could he tell them the lifeline they'd been thrown was really a noose? "Fine," Elias ground out, the word tasting of bile. "I'll take you. Anya, you stay here. Monitor them. If you see one flicker on this network that I haven't authorized, you vent the entire engineering deck into the void." "Understood." Anya's jaw was set like granite. "Understood. Eli, you so much as sneeze in there. Eris, and I'll space you myself." Eris simply smiled. Such delightful provincial charm. The entrance to the Seraphim Wing was a massive blast door, sealed with rusted, heavy-duty mag clamps that hadn't been disengaged in 50 years. It took Elias and two of his strongest scrappers nearly an hour with plasma cutters and hydraulic spreaders to force it open. The air that billowed out was ancient, cold, and sterile, carrying the faint, metallic scent of a tomb. Elias led the way, his heavy mag boots crunching on a thin layer of crystalline dust. He and Eris walked side by side, with two of the silent Xenocorp operatives following like wraiths behind them. The architecture inside was unlike anything else on the station. The corridors were grand, cathedral-like, with sweeping arches and bulkheads forged from an alloy that didn't seem to rust. Faint, ethereal murals could be seen beneath the grime, depicting constellations no longer visible from human space. It was like walking through the fossilized remains of a forgotten dream. "Incredible," Aris murmured, running a gloved hand along a wall. The technology in this ship was centuries ahead of its time. They said the Seraphim was powered by a singularity core, a captured black hole. "Can you imagine the power, Elias?" "I can imagine the catastrophe," Elias said, his light beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. "There are reasons some technology gets left in the past. They reached a vast, spherical chamber that must have been the ship's original bridge or navigation hub. In the center, suspended by energized pylons that still glowed with a faint, residual light, was a device unlike anything Elias had ever seen. It was a complex gyroscope of interlocking golden rings, rotating slowly around a core that seemed to drink the light from his torch. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. "This isn't on the schematics," Elias said, his voice a low whisper. "Of course not." Aris breathed, his eyes wide with a fanatic's gleam. "This is what was never on any public record. This is why we're here." Before Elias could react, Aris's operatives moved with blinding speed. One of them slammed a device against the back of Elias's neck. A jolt of agonizing electricity shot through him, and his vision dissolved into a field of white static. He collapsed to his knees, his muscles locked and spasming. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Eris approaching the floating golden artifact, his face alight with triumphant discovery. The primary conduit was just an excuse. "Little brother." Aris's voice echoed in his fading consciousness. "I didn't come here to stop the blight. I came here to call it. This is a choir, Elias, and it's time for the symphony to begin." One of the operatives knelt and placed the final harmonic balancer not on a power conduit, but directly onto the base of the pylon holding the golden gyroscope. As Aris keyed a command into his wrist-mounted device, the module flared to life. It didn't just bolster a shield, it sent a deep, resonant pulse of pure energy through the ancient artifact. The golden rings began to spin faster and faster, emitting a low, mournful tone that vibrated through the very structure of the station. On the command deck, screens went wild. "Containment field is destabilizing," an officer yelled. "The blight, it's not being repelled anymore. It's changing course. It's converging on us." The gray cloud in the void outside was no longer a diffuse mist. It was pulling together, tightening into a massive, swirling vortex of ravenous nanites, its tendrils reaching out, drawn by the siren song of the Seraphim's heart. Aris hadn't come to install a shield. He had installed a beacon. The first sensation to pierce the electrified fog in Elias's mind was the sound. It was a low, resonant hum that wasn't heard with the ears but felt in the marrow of his bones. A vibration that seemed to shake the station apart at a molecular level. He groaned, the taste of ozone and blood filling his mouth. His muscles screamed in protest as he forced himself to his hands and knees, the deck plates beneath him thrumming with the alien energy. The golden gyroscope in the center of the chamber was a blur of motion, the space around it warping and shimmering. The air had grown heavy, charged with a palpable sense of wrongness. Aris stood before the artifact, arms outstretched as if embracing a god, his face illuminated by its ethereal glow. He was ecstatic, a high priest in a temple of his own making. "Do you feel it?" "Elias!" Aris shouted over the rising thrum, his voice ringing with manic glee. "This is the true nature of the blight. It's not a plague, it's a herd, and for the first time in history, someone holds the shepherd's crook." Elias staggered to his feet, leaning against a bulkhead for support. The device on the back of his neck was gone, but the ghost of its current still danced along his nerves. "You're a madman," Elias rasped, his throat raw. "You'll kill every soul on this station." "Sacrifice," Aris corrected, his eyes never leaving the spinning rings. A small, regrettable sacrifice for the key to ultimate power. The Blight is drawn to specific quantum frequencies. This artifact, the Heart of the Seraphim, as the original crew called it, is a colossal frequency amplifier. The fools who built it meant for it to be a beacon for FTL navigation, a lighthouse in the cosmic dark. They never imagined its true potential. With my harmonic balancers, I can tune its song. I can make the Blight dance to any tune I choose. Anya. Elias yelled into his comm, praying the pulse from the artifact hadn't fried the station's internal systems. Static answered him. He was cut off. Aris chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. I've isolated this wing from your primitive network. No one is coming to save you. No one can even hear you scream. His two operatives moved to flank him, their weapons sleek, white carbines that looked more like surgical instruments than rifles leveled at Elias's chest. They hadn't come to install. They'd come to conquer. But Eris had underestimated the Tolland man. The station wasn't just a collection of systems. It was an organism, and Elias was its heart. He knew its arteries and its dying nerves. He closed his eyes, ignoring the pain, and focused. His mind raced through the station's labyrinthine schematics, a map etched into his memory by years of desperate repairs. The Seraphim wing was isolated, but it wasn't a separate entity. It still drew power. It still had to vent heat. It was still connected. A desperate and suicidal plan began to form in his mind. You think you've won, Elias said, pushing himself off the wall, forcing a defiant strength into his voice. You've activated a dinner bell for a monster you don't understand, and you've locked yourself in the dining room with it. The Blight is a force of nature, Aris scoffed, and I am its master. You're not its master. You're just the loudest noise in the jungle, Elias countered. He began to back away slowly, moving deeper into the shadows of the vast chamber, away from the artifact's blinding light. You don't know what you've really woken up. As if on cue, the hum from the gyroscope deepened, its pitch shifting into a discordant, guttural groan. The very metal of the station screamed in protest. On the exterior, the converging cloud of Blight was no longer just a vortex. It was becoming a solid thing, a colossal, amorphous entity of churning gray dust, miles wide. It slammed against the Tolland man's failing containment field, and this time, the field didn't just flicker, it shattered. Alarms that hadn't been heard in a century shrieked to life throughout the Seraphim wing. Red emergency lighting bathed the ancient corridors in a hellish glow. A fine gray dust began to trickle from the ceiling seams, a sight more terrifying than any invading army. The feast has begun, Aris whispered in reverence. The two operatives remained focused on Elias, their training overriding any primal fear. Elias knew he had only seconds. He dove behind a massive, overturned console just as they opened fire. Needles of coherent light stitched through the air where he'd been standing, superheating the metal of his cover. He scrambled deeper into the wreckage, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. Coolant line, primary cryo-coolant conduit. It runs directly beneath this chamber. Manual override valve, 20 meters from my position. It was a relic of a system designed to vent the original Singularity core in case of a catastrophic failure. Venting supercooled cryofluid into this chamber would be an extinction-level event for anything inside it. It was also his only weapon. He's trying to reach the environmental controls, Eris shouted, his scientific curiosity momentarily eclipsed by annoyance. Don't kill him. I want him to watch. Subdue him. One of the operatives pursued him into the debris field, while the other held a covering position. Elias moved like a ghost through the familiar ruins of forgotten technology, the station's groans and the shriek of alarms covering the sound of his movements. He found the valve access panel a heavy, circular plate in the floor secured by 4 immense locking bolts. It was a manual system, no electronics. Eris couldn't have locked him out of it. As the operative rounded a stack of decaying server racks, Elias ambushed him. He swung a heavy piece of conduit like a club, slamming it into the side of the operative's helmet. The helmet's faceplate cracked, but the man was inhumanly fast. He spun, bringing his rifle up. Elias charged in close, under the weapon's effective range, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed to the floor. A desperate, brutal struggle. The operative was stronger, his movements augmented, but Elias was fueled by a fury that was centuries old, the rage of every soul who had ever been ground under the heel of men like his brother. He got his hands on the operative's rifle, twisting it with all his might. There was a sickening snap as the man's wrist broke. Elias scrambled back, the rifle in his hands, and fired a single, precise shot into the operative's chest. The suit hissed as it depressurized, and the man collapsed. There was no time for relief. The second operative was already firing, forcing Elias to abandon the valve and retreat again. He laid down, suppressing fire, the stolen rifle feeling light and alien in his hands. It fired without recoil, its power pack humming with a quiet deadliness. The chamber was now a war zone, lit by strobing red lights and the muzzle flashes of energy weapons. The gray dust was thicker now, coating every surface. Through the chaos, Elias could see the outer bulkhead begin to shimmer and dissolve, the blight eating its way through the ancient hull. "It's too late, Elias." Eris's voice echoed, triumphant. Witness the future. But Elias wasn't looking at the dissolving wall. He was looking at the coolant pipes that ran along the ceiling, now frosting over as the pressure in the system fluctuated wildly. He fired a burst at the pipes directly above Eris's remaining guard. The supercooled liquid inside was stable only under immense pressure. The energy bolt from the rifle was enough to compromise the pipe's integrity. It exploded in a shower of cryo shards and vapor. The operative was flash frozen, his suit instantly coated in a thick layer of white frost, his arms still raised in a firing stance. He stood there for a second, a perfect statue of violence, before toppling over and shattering on the deck. Aris stared, his ecstatic expression finally cracking, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. He had lost control. The station, this dying beast, was fighting back. Elias seized the moment, sprinting for the valve panel. He holstered the rifle and threw his entire body into turning the first massive bolt. It groaned in protest, metal scraping against metal. The dust was a fog now, visibility dropping to mere feet. He could feel the blight on his skin, a strange, tingling sensation, as if he were being gently sandblasted by invisible hands. "You can't stop it," Eris screamed, fumbling for a sidearm at his belt. "This is destiny. This is a tomb." Elias roared back, getting the second bolt to turn. "And I'm locking the door." He heard the whine of Eris's pistol charging, but before his brother could fire, the heart of the Seraphim, pushed far beyond its designed limits, reacted to the encroaching blurry. The golden rings wobbled violently, and the core of the device flared with an impossibly bright, white light. A wave of pure kinetic force erupted from it, not an explosion, but a physical shove of space-time itself. The wave hit Eris and threw him like a rag doll, slamming him into a far bulkhead. He crumpled to the deck and didn't move. Elias was thrown as well, but his grip on the valve wheel held. The impact nearly tore his arms from their sockets, but he held on. He had 2 bolts left, gritting his teeth against the searing pain. He put all his weight into the 3rd bolt. It gave way with a deafening shriek. The station shuddered violently. A deep, terminal groan that signaled a catastrophic structural failure was imminent. The blight was pouring in now, consuming entire sections of the chamber in a silent, gray tide. He had seconds left. He grabbed the final bolt. For Anya. For the crew. For the 27 souls on the Icarus. He turned. The valve finally gave way. With a roar like a dying titan, the floor plate blew open. A geyser of pure white cryo-mist erupted into the chamber, a blizzard in a bottle. The temperature dropped hundreds of degrees in an instant. The encroaching blight, a creature of molecular motion, froze solid. The dust turned to inert, crystalline statues. The very air cracked and fell to the floor in glittering sheets. Elias, shielded by the valve housing, felt the life leaching cold wash over him. His suit's emergency heater kicked in, a frail defense against the absolute zero of the cryovent. He looked up, his breath frosting in his helmet. The chamber was a frozen hellscape. The heart of the Seraphim was encased in a mountain of jagged ice. The symphony was over, but as he looked at the frozen bulkhead, where the blight had been eating its way through, he saw something that made his blood run colder than the cryo mist. The blight had stopped, but not before it had consumed the outer hull. Through the newly formed crystalline wall, he could see the void of space, and floating in that void, drawn by the beacon, wasn't just a swarm of dust. It was ships, dozens of them. They were jagged, asymmetrical, and looked more grown than built. Their hulls a dark, organic chitin, and they were covered in the gray dust, not as a plague, but as camouflage. The blight wasn't a weapon to be aimed. It was a net, and Eris, in his hubris, had just dragged it in, bringing the fishermen with it. The station was saved from the blight, only to be served up to whatever ancient horror had been hiding within it. The silence that followed the cryovent was more profound than any noise. It was the absolute dead stillness of a world flash frozen, a snapshot of chaos preserved in ice. Elias's own ragged breathing sounded like a storm inside his helmet. He pushed himself away from the valve housing, his limbs stiff and aching from the brutal cold. The chamber was a mausoleum of white frost and jagged ice formations. The heart of the Seraphim, a grotesque, ice-shrouded monument at its center. Eris was a crumpled shape against the far wall, mercifully still. But the true horror wasn't inside. It was outside. Through the crystalline breach in the hull, the alien fleet hung in the void like a pack of sharks that had scented blood. They were silent, motionless, their chitinous hulls absorbing the faint light of the distant brown dwarf. They were watching, waiting. His comm crackled, a burst of static that felt like a miracle. Eli, Elias, can you read me? The whole station. It just shook itself to pieces. What in God's name happened? Anya's voice, raw with panic and fear, was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Anya, he choked out, his voice hoarse. Listen to me. Eris. He wasn't trying to repel the blight. He was calling it. He turned the station into a beacon. Static hissed for a moment. A beacon for what the whole swarm is frozen solid around the Seraphim wing. No, Elias said, his gaze fixed on the silent fleet. The swarm wasn't the threat. It was the bait. We have company. Big. Ugly. And I don't think they're here to trade. He scrambled over the icy debris, his mag boots struggling for purchase. He had to get back. He had to warn them. He found Eris slumped at the base of the wall, a trickle of blood frozen on his temple. He was unconscious, but, improbably, still breathing. Elias felt a surge of cold fury, a desire to leave his brother to the mercy of the void, but he couldn't. Not because of any lingering affection, but because Eris was the only one who might know what they were facing. He slung Eris over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, the dead weight of his betrayal a physical burden. Every step back through the frozen, silent corridors of the Seraphim wing was a battle. The emergency lighting had failed, plunging the ancient ship into a darkness so complete it felt solid. His helmet light cut a narrow, nice, lonely beam through the gloom, revealing frost-covered walls and the occasional frozen, shattered form of a Xenocorp operative. He felt like a ghost haunting his own tomb when he finally reached the blast door leading back to the main station. It was sealed tight. "Anya, I'm at the main door. You have to cut me out," he transmitted, his breath clouding the inside of his faceplate. "We're on our way," she replied, her voice tight with tension. "But Eli, we have another problem. We're picking up broadcasts from them." "What are they saying?" "It's not language. It's code, a stream of complex data packets. And they're not broadcasting it into space. They're trying to interface directly with the station's network." The implications hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. They weren't preparing to attack with weapons. They were trying to hack them, to seize control of the Talon man from the inside out. They were scavengers, just like his own people, but on a scale he could barely comprehend. They didn't just want the parts. They wanted the whole dying machine. The shriek of a plasma cutter from the other side of the door was a welcome interruption to his spiraling dread. Minutes later, a section of the door fell inward with a deafening clang, revealing Anya's grim, determined face, illuminated by the glow of her cutter. Two of his best scrappers stood behind her, rifles raised. Anya's eyes widened as she saw the form slung over his shoulder. "You brought him back?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "He has answers," Elias grunted, stumbling through the opening. "And right now, answers are the only ammunition we have." They dragged Eris to the infirmary, a small, cluttered space that smelled of antiseptic and desperation. While the station's medic worked on his brother, Elias convened his senior crew on the command deck. The mood was grim. The main view screen showed the alien fleet, a silent, menacing constellation of jagged shapes. "They're trying to breach our firewalls," the comms officer reported, his fingers flying across his console. "The code is adaptive. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's not just trying to break the lock, it's learning the shape of the key." "Cut all external network access," Elias ordered. "Isolate the core systems. We go dark. Manual control only." "We already tried," the officer replied, his voice strained. "It's not coming from outside. It's coming from inside the station. The signal originates from the Xenocorp modules, the ones they installed in engineering. The trap had been sprung hours ago. Eris's harmonic balancers weren't just a beacon. They were a Trojan horse, a backdoor into the station's central nervous system." Anya slammed a fist on a console. I'll rip them out myself. No, Elias countered, his mind racing. If we try to remove them, it might trigger a dead man's switch. Or worse, it could be the final handshake they need to gain full control. We need to know what we're dealing with. He turned and stalked out of the command deck, heading for the infirmary. He found Eris awake, handcuffed to a medical cot. The medic had stitched the gash on his head, and the arrogant, condescending light was already returning to his eyes. "You should have left me, Elias," Eris said, his voice a weak croak. "You've only delayed the inevitable." "What are they?" Elias demanded, leaning in close, his voice a low growl. "Who are you working for?" Eris coughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Working for you still think in such small terms. They are not employers. They are the next stage of evolution, a perfect synthesis of organic and machine. They are the chorus." "The chorus," Elias repeated, the name feeling alien on his tongue. "They consume technology," Eris explained, a feverish light in his eyes. "They assimilate it, integrate it, make it part of their own collective consciousness. They have roamed the dark spaces between galaxies for eons, drawn to the broadcast signals of burgeoning civilizations like moths to a flame. They are the great filter and the blight. Their scout, their terraforming agent. It breaks down complex technology into its base components, making it easier for them to digest. Your station, this magnificent graveyard of human achievement, is the richest feeding ground they've found in a millennium." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Xenocorp wasn't in control. They were a cult, acolytes paving the way for a devourer god. "You led them here," Elias said, the accusation flat and heavy. "You sacrificed your own species for, what, a seat at their table?" A voice in the choir, Eris hissed, struggling against his restraints. "They promised me knowledge, a chance to be part of something truly eternal, not this slow, inevitable decay of flesh and rust." A sudden station-wide shudder cut him off. The lights flickered and died, plunging the infirmary into darkness before the red emergency glow kicked in. A new alarm began to sound, not a klaxon, but a calm, synthesized female voice, speaking from every speaker on the station. Network integrity compromised, administrative control transferred. "Welcome, Chorus." Anya's voice crackled over Elias's personal comm. "Eli, we've lost it. We're locked out. They have the whole station, life support, navigation, everything." They hadn't needed to break down the door. Eris had handed them the key. Elias looked at his brother, at the pathetic, triumphant gleam in his eyes, and felt no hatred, only a vast, empty pity. "You didn't get a voice in the choir, Aris," Elias said softly. "You just tuned the orchestra for them. You're the same as the rest of us. You're just part of the meal." He turned and left the infirmary, sealing the door behind him. He found Anya and his senior team in the corridor, their faces pale in the red light. They were trapped, their home now a cage, controlled by an alien intelligence. "What do we do now?" Anya asked, her voice quiet. Stripped of its usual bravado, Elias looked down the long, red-lit corridor at the faces of the people who looked to him for a way out of the dark. He was the engineer. He was the one who knew how the machine worked, and if he couldn't fix it, he would have to break it. They controlled the station's network, Elias said. A new, cold resolve hardening his voice. "But they don't know the station. Not like we do. They have the schematics. But we have the scars. They've taken the brain. But we can still sever the spine." His plan was insane. Born of absolute desperation, it was a scorched earth strategy that would either save them or kill them all in the attempt. "The fusion reactor," he said, his gaze meeting Anya's. "We can't shut it down from the network, but we can still overload it. Manually." Anya's eyes widened in understanding, a flicker of horrified respect in them. A reactor overload wouldn't just disable the station. It would turn the entire Tolan man into a miniature sun. It was a final, defiant act of sabotage, a way to take the feast off the table, permanently. "They wanted a meal," Elias said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Let's give them indigestion." The plan was a death sentence with an uncertain outcome, a final, desperate prayer whispered into the heart of a dying machine. To overload the fusion reactor, they had to physically disengage the magnetic containment safeties and manually retract the core's control rods. It was a sequence that required 3 simultaneous actions in 3 different, widely separated sections of the engineering deck, a dead man's waltz designed by the station's original builders to be impossible to perform accidentally. For Elias and his crew, it was a race against a ghost. The chorus had them. On the command deck, the main screen no longer showed the alien fleet. It displayed a swirling, hypnotic pattern of light, the visual representation of the alien consciousness as it seeped into every system. The calm, synthesized voice continued its litany, reporting the methodical takeover of the station's functions. Atmospheric controls calibrated, gravity plating stabilized, internal security systems activated. Heavy blast doors slammed shut all over the station, their clangor echoing like the closing of a tomb. The light shifted from red to a cold, sterile blue. The chorus wasn't a berserker. It was a meticulous surgeon, preparing its patient for dissection. "It's boxing us in," Anya said, her voice tight, as they gathered in a service junction near engineering. "It knows we're here. It knows where we are, but not what we are." Elias countered, laying out a battered schematic on a crate. "To it, we're just biological contaminants, unpredictable variables. We have to use that." He divided his remaining loyal crew, a dozen scrappers, hard-bitten and grim-faced, into 3 teams. "Anya, you take your team to the primary coolant exchange. You have to purge the tertiary loop. It'll cause a pressure spike that will fool the system into thinking a breach is imminent. That should draw the chorus's attention." He pointed to another junction on the map. "Jorik, you and your team hit the emergency power conduit. We need to create a feedback loop. A massive power surge aimed at the shield emitters. It won't bring the shields back, but it'll flood the network with junk data, blind the chorus for a few precious seconds." "And you?" Anya asked, her eyes searching his. "I'm going to the core," he said simply. "I have to retract the rods myself." There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. These were people who had lived their entire lives on the edge of oblivion. They met his gaze, one by one, and nodded. It was a silent pact, sealed in the cold, blue light of their usurped home. They moved out, ghosts in their own machine, using service tunnels and unlisted maintenance shafts that didn't appear on any official schematic. The station was eerily quiet. The usual hum of machinery replaced by the faint, pervasive thrum of the chorus's consciousness. It was a silence that felt like being watched. Elias moved alone, his path taking him into the deepest, most hazardous parts of the engineering deck. He navigated the labyrinth by touch and memory, the rifle he'd taken from the Xenocorp operative slung over his back. He could feel the chorus's presence, a subtle pressure at the edge of his thoughts, a cold, analytical curiosity. It was searching for him, its digital tendrils probing the network. But he was an analog creature in a digital world, a ghost it couldn't quite resolve. He reached the reactor's observation dome, a thick plasteel bubble overlooking the incandescent fury of the fusion core. The star fire within burned with a steady, placid hum. A caged sun, utterly unaware of the chaos unfolding around it. The control room was empty, the panels dark. The chorus had locked it down completely. The only way to the manual override was through a maintenance hatch that led directly into the containment chamber's outer ring, an area flooded with lethal radiation. He pulled a heavy, lead-lined radiation suit from an emergency locker. It was old. The seals cracked, but it was better than nothing. As he suited up, Anya's voice came over the comm, strained and breathless. "We're in position. Eli, but it's adapting. It's rerouting power. Trying to counter the purge before we even start it. It's learning." "Jorich." "Status?" Elias asked, his own voice muffled by the helmet. "We're at the conduit, planting the charges. We've got company." A burst of energy weapon fire crackled over the comm. The chorus was using the station's own automated defense turrets against them. "Buy me time," Elias grunted, sealing his helmet. "Now, Anya, do it now." He heard her shout the order, followed by the deep, shuddering groan of the coolant pumps being forced into a violent reversal. Alarms blared to life, the real ones this time. A chaotic symphony of panic. The chorus's calm voice was momentarily replaced by a dozen competing, pre-recorded disaster warnings. "Yorick." "Surges away," Yorick yelled, the sound of an explosion punctuating his transmission. "It's working. The network is." "Arg." The comm went dead. Through the dome, Elias saw the reactor's light flicker as the power surge hit the grid. The junk data was flooding the system. It was his window. He crawled through the maintenance hatch into the outer ring. The heat was immense, a physical presence that pressed in on him from all sides. His suit's internal Geiger counter screamed, the needle instantly redlining. He had minutes, maybe less, before the radiation cooked him from the inside out. The override console was 20 meters away. A simple panel with a single, large lever. He pushed forward, his heavy boots clanking on the gantry. Halfway there, a section of the ceiling collapsed, and a defense turret descended on a robotic arm. It swiveled, its optical sensor glowing with a malevolent blue light. The chorus had found him. Elias unslung the Xenocorp rifle and fired. The turret's armor was heavy, designed to withstand the core's radiation, but the alien weapon was brutally efficient. It punched through the plating, and the turret exploded in a shower of sparks. But the distraction had cost him precious seconds. His vision was starting to swim, the edges turning gray. He stumbled forward, his lungs on fire, and gripped the lever. It was heavy, stiff from disuse. He put his entire weight into it, his muscles screaming. For the Talon man, with a final agonized groan of metal, the lever moved. A deep, sure resonant clang echoed through the chamber as the magnetic safeties disengaged. Inside the core, the contained star began to bulge, its placid surface roiling with uncontrolled energy. He had done his part. He collapsed against the console, his strength gone. The radiation was a fire in his blood. This was the end. But then, a voice. Not in his comm, but directly in his head. A voice of calm, cold, synthesized logic. Your action is illogical. The probability of your own survival is 0. This vessel is a unique technological artifact. Its destruction serves no strategic purpose. "Get out of my head," Elias gasped, though he wasn't sure if he spoke the words aloud. "We offer a cessation of hostilities." The chorus continued, its mental voice a chillingly intimate intrusion. "We will integrate your consciousness. Your knowledge of this vessel, your engineering expertise. You will not be consumed. You will be preserved." A voice in the choir. It was the same offer it had made his brother. The devil's bargain. For a moment, a sliver of temptation pierced his resolve. To survive, to see the stars as they did, to understand. He looked at the roiling, dying star in the core. He thought of Anya, of Jorik, of the thousands of souls who had called this pile of rust home. Their lives weren't a strategic calculation. They were everything. Were not artifacts. He transmitted, focusing all his remaining will into a single, defiant thought. "And we're not on the menu." He pushed himself off the console and began the slow, painful journey back to the hatch. He didn't know if Anya had made it out. He didn't know if anyone had. But he had made a choice. The chorus fell silent in his mind. The offer was withdrawn. The entity seemed to pause, as if considering his illogical, emotional defiance. As he reached the hatch, he saw it, floating in the observation dome, surrounded by the swirling energy of the dying reactor, was Eris. He was no longer handcuffed, his eyes glowing with the same cool, blue light as the station's systems. The chorus had found a more willing vessel. A mistake. Eris's voice, now merged with the chorus's, echoed in his mind. But a fascinating one. "We will study your species' capacity for self-destruction from a distance." A small escape pod, one Elias hadn't even known was still functional, detached from a hidden bay beneath the dome and shot away from the station. A tiny spark of light fleeing into the void. Elias pulled himself through the hatch, collapsing back into the control room just as the reactor core went critical. A wave of pure, white light flooded the dome, silent and absolute. He saw the bulkhead begin to vaporize, the metal peeling away like paper. He closed his eyes, a strange sense of peace settling over him. He had fought the ghost of the Icarus his entire life, haunted by a failure that had cost 27 lives. Today, he had saved 3,000. It was a good trade. From the bridge of a salvaged shuttle, drifting a safe distance away, Anya watched the Tolland man die. There was no sound, only a brilliant, expanding sphere of light that momentarily outshone the distant brown dwarf. It was a beautiful, terrible funeral pyre. She didn't know how many had made it to the handful of operational escape pods and shuttles. Dozens. Maybe. Not enough. But they were alive. They were free. She looked at the faces of the survivors crowded onto her small bridge. They were bruised, battered, and homeless. But the fear in their eyes was gone, replaced by a hard, fierce light. They had faced the void's deepest horrors and had spit in its eye. "Where to now?" one of them asked, his voice raw. Anya looked out at the starfield, at the infinite, lonely darkness. The chorus was still out there. So was Eris. This wasn't over. Elias had given them a chance. He had passed the torch. She gripped the shuttle's controls, her knuckles white. "Anywhere but here," she said, her voice steady. "We're scrappers. We'll pick up the pieces, and we'll be ready." The shuttle turned, its engines flaring to life, and pushed out into the great, silent dark, a tiny defiant spark carrying the memory of the ship that had chosen to burn rather than be consumed.